The year was 2017. Angie Thomas's debut novel The Hate You Give, about a young black American girl who witnesses her friend get shot by the police and stands up to be a voice for her community, had rocketed to the top of the New York Times young adult bestseller list and stayed there for 24 weeks straight. But on week 25, a new book appeared at number 1, Handbook for Mortals by Lani Sarem. And this led to one of the most infamous scandals the book world has ever seen. My name is Ellie Blackwood. I'm a sci-fi and fantasy writer in progress, and today we're going to be taking a dive into the past and present of the Handbook for Mortals scam. Sometimes books end up becoming bestsellers for unexpected reasons. I have a whole video essay on how my favorite book became a New York Times bestseller because of a tweet from an anime fandom account. But Handbook for Mortals rocketed up the charts through slightly less innocent means. With this video, I am of course going to be recapping the drama, but I also want to bring it into 2025 a little bit. Not only will I be giving some updates about things that have happened with the book since the original scandal, but I also want to make a point about how the scandal could only have gone down the way that it did in 2017. People willing to scam their way into success have existed across all of history. But I believe that the messiness of this particular situation was exacerbated by some specific factors that were at play in the book world during that time. I'm really interested to hear all of your opinions about this situation, whether you'd heard of Handbook for Mortals before or you're hearing about it here for the first time. So be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments. I have researched all of this as best I can, but I want to give a disclaimer that this is not a piece of professional journalism, and I found out a lot of this information alleged by secondhand sources. If you like video essays about books, science fiction, Doctor Who, and all that goodness, be sure to subscribe to my channel. And if you want to keep up with all of my latest projects and content, including getting access to my YouTube videos 3 days before anyone else, be sure to subscribe to my monthly newsletter, which you can find linked in the description. Now let's dive into the mess. Before I get into the details of why it was so sketchy that this book hit the New York Times bestseller list, I think it's important to understand what Handbook for Mortals was. Handbook for Mortals was a contemporary fantasy novel published by Geek Nation, a pop culture website launched in 2012 that created a publishing arm in 2017 pretty much just for this book. As far as I can tell, they never published another book after this. The book's full title on Amazon is Handbook for Mortals, Book 1 of the series, which I think is very funny. It's not uncommon for publishers to put the series name in the Amazon listing title to make it easier for people to find the book, or even to put keywords related to the book's genre in the Amazon listing title for search engine optimization purposes. But this is like the opposite of search engine optimization. So the thing about Handbook for Mortals is that it's bad. It's just really poorly written. To get an idea of what the narrative of the book reads like, let's take a look at an excerpt from the first chapter. This is how the book begins. I've always envied those with normal lives. I don't think I've ever even had a normal month, a plain week, or an average day. At best, I've had brief normal moments here and there. They tend to be few and far between. I'm sure most people would envy me, but some days I think I'd trade places in a heartbeat. To me, those moments of feeling normal or getting to do average things have always felt like a cool, sparse breeze on the hottest summer day, or the first breath you take after holding it underwater for as long as you can. It goes on like that for 2 pages. Now, I'm not the most experienced writer in the world. I haven't been published yet, and my main credentials are taking a few creative writing courses in college and going through a couple of mentorship programs. But generally, it's important to begin your story by grounding the reader in a scene as quickly as possible, especially if you're writing genre fiction like fantasy. I'm not saying that it's impossible to successfully begin a fantasy story with 2 whole pages of navel-gazing platitudes, but that would take both the right story and immense skill that both Lani Sarem and I do not have. Okay, let's take a look at when we finally get some scene setting. For me, I will never forget one particular July morning, the grey clouds that hovered over the ancient trees lining the street, the wind that blew swiftly through my blonde hair. It also spun about the chunky pieces on the lower half of my long hair, which I had dyed to be a multitude of fun colors. Today they were pink, purple, blue, and a turquoise green, but I have a habit of changing the colors frequently. My perfectly cut bangs stayed mostly unaffected by the wind, except for a few squirrely pieces. No, go on, shove in some more clunky character description just as we were starting to get some narrative. My well-worn and once brightly colored but now badly faded with dirt spackle Converse high-top sneakers made a quick tapping noise on each step. I had just replaced the laces on them, so at least least they looked somewhat decent. My favorite high-waisted Levi's dark denim skinny jeans, ripped in all the right places, made the swishing noise as I lifted my legs, and my perfect flowy Lucky's top that I wear far too often billowed around me. I rarely think this, but I wish a photographer had taken my picture at that moment, as the outfit and the background and I may have produced a cool-looking photo. I think it's really funny that when I was narrating that excerpt, I had to stop myself from pausing to add in punctuation that isn't in the text because the grammar in this book is just atrocious. But at least the main character has a pretty cool distinctive look with the blonde hair dyed at the ends and stuff. They managed to capture that quite well on the book's cover. Oh whoops, that's not the cover, that's a picture of the author. Oh whoops, that's not the cover either, that's an art piece by Gildel Mace called The Knife Thrower. Aha, there we go. That was some foreshadowing for later in the video. If you're interested in more in-depth commentary about the book's writing, you should read Jenny Trout's hilarious blog post series where she reacts to every chapter, which I've linked in the description. For now though, here's a quick summary about the plot of Handbook for Mortals. Our multicolor-haired protagonist is called Scheherazade Esther Holder, Zaid for short. She has the ability to do real magic, and she leaves her mother and her small-town home to go make it big as a stage magician in Vegas. As Trout points out in her blog post series, it's basically like the DC Comics character Zatanna. Zaid ends up in the employ of famous magician Charles Spellman, who turns out to be her father. She gets caught up in a love triangle, meandering plot shenanigans ensue, etc. There are a lot of men falling all over themselves for her because she's just that pretty and awesome, and a lot of women who hate her because they're jealous of her. What? It's not a self-insert for the author, what are you talking about? So the thing about the young adult category in the United States is that it means a category of books aimed at teenagers. I know the name is kind of confusing, and I don't know why they don't just call it the teen category, but the industry expectation is that a young adult book, which I will henceforth be abbreviating as YA, is supposed to be aimed at readers aged 13 to 18. The YA category has definitely skewed older in recent years due to the amount of adults who read and buy YA. There was a brief attempt in around 2015 or so to create a new adult category aimed at readers aged 18 to 25 that would capture the audience of adult readers who enjoy the fast pace and coming-of-age narratives present in YA literature. But that never really got off the ground in traditional publishing, at least not to the extent that bookstores reliably have a new adult section. I don't think there's anything wrong with adults enjoying YA literature, I certainly do, but there is an ongoing issue where younger teenagers are kind of being pushed out of a category that is supposed to be for them. For example, it's more normal nowadays for YA protagonists to be aged between 17 and 19 rather than 14 or 15. This shift was well underway back in 2017 as well. That said, despite the fact that it appeared on the New York Times YA bestseller list, Handbook for Mortals doesn't even make an attempt at being YA in my opinion. Yes, the voice sounds juvenile at times, but Zaid is supposed to be about 25, which is just way too old for a YA protagonist. If she was aged down to 19, maybe that would be just about okay, but YA books aren't usually about someone starting their first career. I don't know if Lani Sarem decided to market the book as YA because she just thought it would be easier. It annoys the crap out of me when people assume that books for children are easier to write than books for adults. They're not, it's just a different skill set, I've written both. I'm not necessarily accusing Sarem of this line of thinking because I don't know what was going through her mind when she chose a marketing angle, but what I am saying is that it seems clear to me that she didn't know the category very well. Another kind of odd thing about this book is the amount of celebrity name-dropping and involvement in the whole thing. Sarem was a band manager who used to manage the Plain White T's, and they appear in the book as themselves. Weirdly, they're not that famous in the book, and also a character named Jackson is the lead singer. But it's not just any old Jackson! That's right, a very thinly disguised Jackson Rathbone of Twilight fame appears in the book as a love interest for the main character, and the author also used to manage his band 100 Monkeys. And Rathbone didn't seem super happy at being dragged into all this, as we will see later. There's also a scene in the book where Zaid meets popular Las Vegas entertainers Carrot Top and Wayne Newton, and they just gush over how great she is. Thomas Ian Nicholas, who acted in the movie American Pie, was heavily involved in the promotion and business plan for the book, and the publisher itself, Geek Nation, was owned by Buffy the Vampire Slayer actress Claire Kramer. Finally, Lani Sarem's cousin is JC Chazé of NSYNC, and he tweeted his support for the book when it came out. I think one of the things that's so fun about this scandal is that the wild details just pile up the more you look. And there's plenty more of those to come, so now it's time to get into what actually happened. Much of what I'm going to detail here was collected and investigated by Kaylee Donaldson of the pop culture outlet Pajiba. I've linked her massive expose about this whole thing in the description of this video. But we should probably start with the context that the YA book community is very passionate about supporting upcoming releases, and a lot of promotion happens by word of mouth. Books that make it to bestseller lists get there because they've had buzz building for months in advance, and so it's usually not a surprise when a book hits #1. But when Handbook for Mortals appeared at the top of the New York Times bestseller list that fateful day in August of 2017, it raised a lot of eyebrows because no one had ever heard of it before. YA author Phil Stamper posted a Twitter thread detailing his confusion about the book. I find it strange that a mediocre website can decide it wants to be a publisher and 1 month later hit #1 on the New York Times bestsellers list. Stamper attached a screenshot of statistics about the Geek Nation website, showing that it ranked 297,399th out of all websites in the United States. Stamper continued, "This is what I'm referencing, a book that's out of stock on Amazon and is not currently in any physical Barnes & Noble in the tri-state area. A book that no one has heard of except for the 2 niche blogs that covered the Geek Nation press release. Sells about 5,000 in the first week? Okay." Here Stamper was referencing the fact that when a book hits the New York Times bestsellers list, it usually has sold over 5,000 copies. Stamper concluded, "You shouldn't be able to buy your way onto the New York Times list, but here we are." And this is coming from someone who gets all the warm fuzzies when smaller presses hit the NYT list. The book only had 9 reviews on Goodreads, some of which were duplicates. Books that sell enough to hit the New York Times bestseller list usually have dozens if not hundreds of ratings and reviews by their release week due to publishers sending out advance copies to book reviewers. And yet somehow, as noted by writer and publishing professional Jeremy West, Handbook for Mortals had sold 18,000 copies according to the industry standard US sales tracker Bookscan. According to various sources that Stamper, West, and the outlet Pajiba spoke to, Sarem or someone working with her had allegedly hired the company Results Source to coordinate the bulk buying of her book to get it onto the New York Times bestseller list. Buying your own books in bulk to hit the New York Times bestseller list isn't anything new. Politicians and celebrities do it quite frequently for their memoirs and self-help books, though the New York Times is supposed to put a dagger symbol next to the book to indicate that it hit the list because of bulk sales, which they did not do for Handbook for Mortals. The New York Times has always been rather opaque about who it decides to add to the list. It's not based on straight-up sales as you might think. There is a certain amount of curation involved, and there have been many instances when authors didn't hit the list despite having sold more copies than books that did make it onto the list. Not all bookstore sales count for the purposes of the New York Times, so it's not just as simple as selling a bunch of books through Amazon and calling it a day. Having the designation of New York Times bestselling author is one of the highest marks of commercial success an author can achieve, and something they can then put on all of their marketing materials till the end of time. So the lack of transparency around how people get on this list is exceptionally frustrating. The company Results Source and the rest of Sarem's marketing team allegedly went to great lengths to avoid triggering the addition of that dagger symbol for Handbook for Mortals. Stamper and West shared that they'd gotten messages from booksellers who said that they'd gotten calls from people who asked if they reported to the New York Times and then placed an order for a bunch of copies of Handbook for Mortals. Often, according to these booksellers, the mystery caller would place an order for a number of books that was just under the threshold for what would be considered a bulk order, thereby lessening the possibility that the New York Times would catch on. I do want to stress that none of this was illegal, but it's certainly considered poor form, and so predictably there was a massive outcry in the book community about this. Aside from the general scumminess of paying your way onto a bestseller list, and also aside from the fact that Handbook for Mortals wasn't really a YA book and also wasn't very good, a large part of the backlash was because of which book it knocked off the #1 spot. The Hate U Give was very highly regarded when it first came out, and it has since become something of a modern classic. It has been banned and challenged numerous times in school districts across the US as part of a wave of censorship that disproportionately targets books dealing with racism. So to have such an important story knocked off the top of the list by a book that certainly hadn't earned its place there based on merit heightened the distastefulness of the whole thing. In the end, the New York Times revised the list to remove Handbook for Mortals after it had been there for 23 hours. The Hate U Give remained at #1 on the New York Times bestseller list for a total of 50 weeks, and in 2018 there was a movie adaptation starring Amandla Stenberg. So why did Lani Sarem do all this? Well, allegedly, according to sources who spoke with Pajiba, Sarem had been promised a movie deal deal if Handbook for Mortals became a bestseller. The book had actually begun as a screenplay, and Sarem then rewrote it as a novel to try and get it off the ground that way. So have you guessed it yet? Have you guessed who was going to play Zaid in the Handbook for Mortals movie? That's right, it was Lani Sarem herself. That's why her author photo shows her with her hair dyed the same way as Zaid's. The book trailer for Handbook for Mortals even shows a clip of Sarem to represent Zaid. Actually, this might be meant as a trailer for the movie because there's a title card saying based on the book series, but who even knows at this point? Sarem has an IMDb page that outlines some of her acting roles that she's had over the years, the majority of which are uncredited. So it's not like she'd never set foot on a film set before, but she certainly wasn't a known actor by any means. And remember how I mentioned that Thomas Ian Nicholas of American Pie fame was heavily involved in promoting the book? Well, he was going to be in the movie as well as a character named Tad, who is not one of the love interests, he's just some other guy. Jenny Trout, that author who wrote the hilarious chapter-by-chapter reaction to Handbook for Mortals, also blogged her reaction to reading the screenplay after someone sent her a 2011 draft. I'll link Trout's blog post in the description so you can read her commentary, but spoiler alert, the screenplay was also really bad. Some of the musical artists who'd previously worked with Sarem had some pretty hilarious reactions to all this. John Popper of the band Blues Traveler, who Sarem used to manage, tweeted, "This is weird but not surprising. We fired her for these kinds of stunts. Her sense of denial is staggering, and though this is the first time we've heard of this, I must say that she is keen to never miss a trick, and really is a master at describing how her hair seems to her. We wish her luck on this one." Jackson Rathbone then posted this tweet quoting the Blues Traveler account, quote, "Her sense of denial is staggering," end quote. Spot on, Mr. Popper. Spot on. In a lovely turn of events, some YA writers managed to convince Popper to donate a bunch of money to buy diverse books for a Texas classroom, which was very nice of him. Also, remember my foreshadowing about how similar the book's cover looks to The Knife Thrower by Gildell Mace? Well, when readers began pointing out the connection, the cover artist Ryan M. Kincaid stated that he had been told to create an homage to that piece and was told that proper credit would be given. Kaylee Donaldson of Pajaba reached out to Del Mace's agent, who alleged that nobody had ever approached the artist to ask for permission or to credit Del Mace, and that a representative of the author said that it was too late to give Del Mace credit for inspiring the cover because the book had already gone to print. How utterly convenient, said the agent. So how did the team behind the book respond to their madcap scheme being foiled? So at this point, Lani Sarem had been utterly found out. At first, she tried to deny everything. Eventually, the line from her and her partner in crime, Thomas Ian Nicholas, became, "Well, yes, we did buy a bunch of copies of Handbook for Mortals in bulk, but it was only because we were going to sell so many of them at conventions." I think this goes without saying, but I don't think you can argue that your book is popular enough to be on the New York Times bestseller list when you actually haven't sold those books to your supposed massive audience of readers yet. As far as I can tell, they did not collect 18,000 pre-orders before bulk buying all those books. They aren't real sales to real people, as Sarem claimed in op-eds in Billboard and the Huffington Post. Also, according to professional booksellers, the biggest authors in the world don't sell 18,000 copies at conventions, which means that Sarem's claim that those books were going to actual readers was highly doubtful. Sarem argued that she was simply using an innovative business model inspired by her time in the music industry. In her op-ed, she wrote, "The fact is, the sales of my book are quite real. They were just not sold through methods established by the book industry, but rather a practice more akin to how artists sell CDs at their concerts. In the music industry, those sales are registered by SoundScan if they are verified by a venue and therefore count toward an artist's ranking in the charts. But the book industry has no such mechanism." Which is hilarious because the book industry does have a mechanism like that. My understanding is that typically, the way selling books at an event works is that a bookstore hosts an author for the event, and the bookstore orders a bunch of copies of the book to stock the event with. When a reader buys a book at the event, the bookstore logs it as a sale, and if the bookstore reports to the New York Times bestseller list, that will count as a sale for the purposes of hitting the list. Any books that don't get sold at the event and that the bookstore can't shift on their own after the fact will get returned to the publisher and therefore not count as a sale. So there absolutely are industry standard ways to sell books at an event and still have it count. In the end, Sarem leaned into the controversy, getting stickers for her book that said New York Times bestseller for 23 hours. She also claimed in her op-ed that we published the book with the film rights already in place, set to produce the first of up to 5 Handbook for Mortals films that will star in the lead role yours truly, alongside my producer and co-star Thomas Ian Nicholas, if all goes well. I'm going to get into the current state of the Handbook for Mortals franchise later in this video, but I want you to take a wild guess about whether this vision of 5 films has even slightly come to pass. Yeah, that's what I thought. But before we move on from the events of 2017 and talk about what came after, I want to touch on another bonkers controversy that came out of this that actually had very little to do with Lani Sarem herself. The Handbook for Mortals scandal inadvertently led to the supposed solving of a decade-long fandom mystery that turned out to be a scam in and of itself. And I think that's worth talking about because I want to illustrate how the layers of weirdness just keep going. So back in 2006, there was a Harry Potter fanfiction called My Immortal that went viral for being really terrible. If you're not familiar, here's how it began. Hi, my name is Ebony Darkness Dementia Raven Way, and I have long ebony black hair, that's how I got my name, with purple streaks and red tips that reaches my mid-back, and icy blue eyes like limpid tears, and a lot of people tell me I look like Amy Lee. Author's note, if you don't know who she is, get the hell out of here. I'm not related to Gerard Way, but I wish I was because he's a major f***ing hottie. I'm a vampire, but my teeth are straight and white. I have pale white skin. I'm also a witch, and I go to a magic school called Hogwarts in England where I'm in the 7th year. I'm 17. I'm a goth, in case you couldn't tell, and I wear mostly black. I love Hot Topic and I buy all my clothes from there. For example, today I was wearing a black corset with matching lace around it and a black leather miniskirt, pink fishnets, and black combat boots. I was wearing black lipstick, white foundation, black eyeliner, and red eyeshadow. I was walking outside Hogwarts. It was snowing and raining, so there was no sun, which I was very happy about. A lot of preps stared at me. I put up my middle finger at them. The grammar and spelling of the story just kind of deteriorates from there. The original fanfiction has now been deleted, but it has been replicated in a bunch of places online for your reading pleasure. It's been heavily debated whether or not it was satire or just the work of someone who was very bad at writing. While My Immortal was written under the pseudonym Tara Gillespie, nobody knew the author's real identity. But after the Handbook for Mortals fiasco, people started wondering, is Lani Sarem actually Tara Gillespie? After all, the titles of the two works are quite similar, and they're both quite bad. And you might remember when I read that snippet of Handbook for Mortals earlier, the way Zaid describes her own appearance completely unprompted isn't all that dissimilar to how Ebony does the same at the start of My Immortal. So is there some kind of connection there? The answer is no, it's just a coincidence. A lot of inexperienced writers start out their stories by describing their main character unprompted. But the speculation brought someone else out of the woodwork who did claim that they wrote My Immortal. Rose Christo was a writer who had self-published some books for teens, and she said she'd written My Immortal as an outlet and as a way of trying to reconnect with her brother, who she'd become separated from in foster care. It was meant to be satire, she said, and she hoped it would make her internet famous enough that she would be able to find her brother again. In which case it seems a bit weird to be writing under a pseudonym when you're trying to find someone who knew you under your real name, but okay. Christo quickly secured a deal with a big publisher to write a memoir about her life called Under the Same Stars, The Search for My Brother and the True Story of My Immortal. She said she had provided evidence to the publisher that she did indeed write My Immortal. Except then, Christo's brother came forward and said that she was lying about a lot of her claims, including that they had Cree heritage and that he hadn't contacted her since their separation. He said he had tried to reach out to her multiple times, but she had never replied. He couldn't confirm whether or not she wrote My Immortal, but some of her claims about the circumstances around her writing My Immortal didn't add up, so the general consensus is that she was probably lying about that too. The evidence she supposedly provided to the publisher was a flash drive with the first 11 chapters of My Immortal on it, and it's pretty easy to fake the creation date of a computer file. So her book deal got cancelled, Rose Christo vanished off the face of the earth, and to this day, we still don't know who wrote My Immortal. The Tumblr historian YouTuber Strange Eons has a couple of great videos from 2022 that go deeper into the My Immortal saga and the various theories for its authorship that have sprung up over the years, including more details about the Rose Christo situation. I've linked the one that discusses Rose Christo in the description of this video, which was a great help in jogging my memory for this part of the script, so I would definitely recommend watching that if you're interested in learning more. That was quite a long tangent, but the point is that the legacy of Handbook for Mortals will now be forever tied up with my Immortal drama, and I find that very funny. But that was then, and this is now, so we have to ask. In the years since the scandal, Lani Sarem has sporadically appeared at conventions promoting Handbook for Mortals. A 2018 press release about her convention appearances does not mention the New York Times bestseller list controversy at all, but it does tout the fact that the project is female-based, and I think it's very funny that this is trying to position the book as feminist when every woman who isn't the main character is either a service worker or portrayed as stupid and petty and jealous of how much male attention Zayd gets. In 2022, author Lindsay Ely posted a picture of the standee that Sarem used at a convention, and I think it's worth breaking it down. So the top of the banner says USA Today Bestseller. The book did also hit number 34 on the USA Today bestseller list, and I'm not sure whether that was because of the bulk buying or because of some people buying it out of sheer curiosity after the fact. The USA Today bestseller list is more based on straightforward sales than the New York Times list is, and it's generally considered easier to hit because it includes outlets like Amazon, though it is still certainly an achievement to get on there. So we have the title of the book, and then it says, if you like these, Harry Potter, The Twilight Saga, Vampire Diaries, and Beautiful Creatures, then you will love this new urban fantasy series. There are a couple of really funny things here. First, those are the actual copyrighted logos of these 4 properties, so this might constitute copyright infringement. It's not copyright infringement just to mention other properties whose fans might enjoy your book, that's a very common established practice in the book industry, but using the logos in your own promo material is legally questionable. I also think it's funny that the sign says new when the book had come out 5 years ago at this point, and series when to this day there is still only 1 book out. To be fair, Sarem might have had this sign made in 2017 and just decided to reuse it, but she did also scam her way onto the New York Times bestseller list, so I don't feel that bad about lightly poking fun at her sign. Nested among the illusions of Las Vegas comes an original story where magic becomes reality and nothing is as it appears, followed by the book's website and social media handles. The book's website currently shows an error 404, and the Facebook and Instagram accounts haven't been updated since 2023. Read the book before it becomes a major motion picture and find out why the only thing more dangerous than real magic is love. USA Today bestseller and number 1 on the New York Times bestseller list for 23 hours. And then a little block about the author. So as far as the book itself, as recently as 2023, the Handbook for Mortals social media accounts have claimed that more stuff is coming. In April 2023, the Instagram account claimed that book 2 was indeed in the works, with this little snippet, "Hey, Mac, wait up!" Mac was the other love interest that was not Jackson Rathbone. Meanwhile, in April 2023, the Facebook account proclaimed, "We know it's been a long wait, but the audiobook will finally be out before the end of May. Likely sooner. More debts coming soon." That was the last thing the account has posted to this day. And before you ask, no, there does not appear to be an audiobook available anywhere. And of course, the coveted movie has had no obvious movement, and its IMDb page is locked to everyone except IMDb Pro users because it's marked as in development. So the scandal remains relegated to the archives of history, but those who were on the bookish internet in 2017 will always remember. And as one of those people, I've been reflecting on how 2017 provided a perfect storm of factors to make this incident especially infamous. Could the Handbook for Mortals scandal happen today? I mean, mechanically it can. It is still possible to bulk buy your way onto the New York Times bestseller list. And there is still no shortage of people who would rather take a shortcut to success than give it an honest try. But I think the details of how it would play out in 2025 would be different, and in some ways perhaps not as dramatic. One of the reasons the scam was uncovered so quickly is that the YA book community on Twitter banded together and shared information to quickly work out what was going on. Twitter was central to the book community back in 2017, but these days the bookish internet is more scattered and decentralized because of a change in ownership. Without Twitter, I think people still would have been able to share information and work out what was going on, it just might not have happened as quickly. Another reason the Handbook for Mortals fiasco rubbed people the wrong way is that it topped the YA bestseller list despite not showing a good knowledge of YA genre conventions. It came across as someone trying to jump on a popular category for clout without understanding who the audience was. But YA was a much bigger market back in 2017. The category still exists today and bestsellers still come out of it, But there's been a bit of a market correction as publishers pull back from buying the absolute mounds of YA that they went after in the 2010s. So if Lani Sarem was trying to chase a popular trend, she might pick a different niche in the modern day. And the big popular trend these days is romantasy, that is romance books that are set in a fantasy world. These stories are usually aimed at adults and can feature explicit content, but they often feature protagonists age 18 to 25 and retain some of the fast pace of the YA category. Romantasy basically fills the niche that the failed new adult category was going after. In fact, this would have been a great slot for Handbook for Mortals to market itself. It's a fantastical story featuring a 25-year-old protagonist that largely revolves around a love triangle. I mean, don't get me wrong, it would have still been an object of ridicule because the book isn't very good, but at least it would have fit the genre conventions a bit better. The YA community is very passionate about supporting debut authors. If Sarem had tried to get involved with the community, understand the conventions of the category, write a book intended for a YA audience, and, not scam her way onto the New York Times bestseller list, she probably would have been welcomed with open arms. But instead, the whole approach just came off as lazy. And to make matters worse, the book that Handbook for Mortals knocked off the top spot was a darling of the YA book world for very good reason. The Hate You Give wasn't just a popular book, it was a devastatingly important one. That's not to say that fluffy books just meant to entertain shouldn't also become bestsellers, but they should do it fair and square rather than trying to game the system. I do think that if Handbook for Mortals debuted in the modern day and ended up knocking, say, the latest Fourth Wing book off the top of the adult hardcover New York Times bestseller list, it would still be a scandal, but it wouldn't feel as outrageous as the version that actually happened in real life. But all of this is just my opinion, so be sure to leave your thoughts about the Handbook for Mortals scandal and its legacy in the comments. If you enjoy bookish video essays like this one, be sure to subscribe to my channel for more, and also check out my monthly newsletter to get access to all of my videos 3 days early and keep up with my other projects and content too. The link to that is in the description. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.